Hello and welcome to Brian Moore's Full Contact with the Telegraph. Got 2 rounds left in the 2026 Nations. England remain firmly in the hunt for the title, heading into Saturday's clash with their old rivals Wales. After a week off, Eddie Jones now got more options available to him because Mako Vunipola and Anthony Watson have both recalled to the squad. And as for Wales, well, it's been a tournament to forget so far for Wayne Pivac in his first 6 Nations. A defeat on Saturday would mean 3 successive losses, and that would be the first time since 2007 that's happened to Wales. We'll speak to the Ospreys fly half, James Hook, about the difficult task that awaits Pivac and co on Saturday. Only be 2 matches this weekend after Ireland's clash with Italy in Dublin was called off due to concerns over the coronavirus. The Irish Health Minister, Simon Harris, ruled the game should be postponed given the spread of the virus in Italy, which now sits at around 1,600 cases. We'll speak to Liam Toland of the Irish Times about when a rematch is likely to take place and what the reaction has been from the IRFU to having the fixture called off. Scotland picked their first win up of the tournament. It was round 3 away win against Italy. Up next for Gregor Townsend is a home match against the leaders France, and ahead of the game it's emerged that the exile fly half Finn Russell will not be returning for the final 2 games, so they're not kissed and made up. But he could return in the summer to win his 50th cap. The former back row of Dave Denton, he's been around the Scotland squad with both Townsend and Russell, and he'll join us to chat about their relationship and the game that Scotland have this weekend. Off the pitch, the major headlines surround the television rights for the Six Nations tournament. It's been reported that Sky are leading the race to take the rights off free-to-air TV, meaning the Six Nations will be behind a paywall for the first time in its history from 2021. We'll be answering all your questions on that and a few other topics. And I'm delighted to say to help me once again is the former England hooker, George Chuter. Hello, George.
Hello, Maura.
2 games left for England. How have you made their Six Nations so far?
Well, I mean, I think obviously the opening game against the French was a pretty poor display in Paris.
Well, first half, certainly.
Yeah, certainly first half. And yeah, no disrespect to the French, but I think England really sort of got caught cold there, given all the sort of build up in the week. But the French have now gone on to show that wasn't a fluke. They are the real deal. So the Scotland actually quite enjoyed the Scotland game. It was a bit of a slog up front with the weather and a bit of an arm wrestle.
You would do coming from Leicester.
Absolutely.
John loved it as well, you know.
I'm from South London. But actually, although the performance in Murrayfield wasn't great, a win up there is good. I mean, let's not joke, beat around the bush. The first half against Ireland last week again, pretty good. Would like to probably seen a bit more clinical finishing and actually pull away from Ireland in the end. And the second half was a bit sort of scrappy. So I guess sort of a C+ really for the first 3 games in terms of England's performance. So obviously 2 wins out of 3, losing in Paris is no disgrace there. That happens. But I think there's certainly issues around the attack, in particular the attack and some of the kicking game. I think the defence has been outstanding, probably the best I've seen for a very long time from almost any international team, I think. They look very strong, they look very organised, real good line speed, not many missed tackles from individuals either. So the defensive side, it's a big check. That's an A+ for John
a lot of
Mitchell.
dominant tackles as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially given the sort of the imbalance in the back row, I guess having a 7, 8 would make your defence pretty good anyway. But so I think from a defensive point of view, flying high, attack and some of the kicking from hand, not quite up to that level yet.
Well, Watson and Mako Vunipola, they're back available. Do you expect them to start?
I think Watson, perhaps not. I think again, we're trying to sort of read Eddie's mind here in terms of his selection. He could end up playing the back row with Anthony Watson. I mean, Vunipola, I think Ellis Genge has earned a start somewhere on the line, and I think he probably earned that in the first couple of games. So I think he's got to play in my eyes. Then do you put Marlow or Vunipola on the bench? I don't know. I suspect he'll come back in straight back because he was away for family reasons, I believe, wasn't he? So it's not as if he's been injured or anything like that. So he is good to go. I think they'll go back with Mako Vunipola, and I think Watson may be on the bench. But like I say, I'm not. I've given up trying to read Eddie Jones's mind regarding selection.
Well, another point. Try and read into this for the first time. Opted for the third scrum half. This is just in the extended squad, though.
Yeah.
Exeter's Jack Maunder. Why do you think he's picked him more than a bit more established scrum half? I'm not with a greatest respect to Jack Maunder. He's a good player.
I think this is probably a bit of a nod to the next World Cup, a bit of development, getting people involved slowly but surely, who are likely to be in and around the squad in 4 years' time. Willie Hines, probably not. He's 34 years old. Will he be an international scrum half in 4 years? Unlikely. Ben Young's 31 years old, I think. Similar questions around him. His form's not been great of late. So I think this is probably a little bit of a kick at the backside for those two to make sure there's no complacency, but also having an early look at a potential future scrum half. And I think there's actually scrum half. There's Mitchell at Saints. I think he's another option. There's a couple of good young ones who certainly could be coming into their prime in 4 years' time. So I think it's probably a little bit of a nod to that.
What have you made of the 6-2, 6 forwards and 2 backs?
Love it.
Split on the bench. I mean, there's an argument that, certainly given the weather and the way that the Six Nations tournament, the attritional nature of it, that it's actually more effective in this tournament than, say, a summer tour or the World Cup.
Yeah, I don't have a massive problem with it. Joking aside, I think the attritional nature of the Six Nations, as you've alluded to there, particularly against the top teams like Ireland and Wales at Twickenham, actually having an extra forward on the bench is a bonus. In desperation, you could probably stick one of the two of the back rows on the wing because they're athletic enough to do a job, not necessarily be international standard, but. On the flip side, if you lose a back row, then you're putting a back in the back row, or forcing the second row into the back row. Then that really upsets your game a lot more than. Again, no disrespect to wingers, it's a slightly easier job to stand on the wing and make tackles if you're an athlete than it is to go and do sort of the rucking of the mauling.
Well, I mean, the luxury England have got is that so many of their backs have played in 2 or 3 positions that you can sort that without too much disruption.
Also, I think it's probably a bit of injury. If guys aren't 100%, and I don't know what the injury status is of some of the back 5 members of the team, of the squad at the moment. Perhaps it is a bit more precautionary in that respect. Tactically, I can see, as you mentioned there, the tactics. I can see the reasoning behind it. There are also maybe some other underlying reasons. I don't know if they've got enough fit backs to put 3 or 4 on the bench. So maybe that's another point. Like I say, I don't have a problem with it. I think you can. It's not too much to expect. I don't know, 9 to 15 playing 80 minutes if necessary. I think it's slightly different up front these days.
Well, next up for England is Wales. They're at home. Going to be a difficult game for Wales. Why don't we speak to James Hook, the Ospreys fly half and former Welsh fly half, who's joining us now. Hello, James.
How are you boys? You okay?
Yeah, not bad, mate. Look, Wayne Pivac has not been helped by the number of injuries. Dan Biggar is the latest setback. Rhys Patchell, Owen Williams, Gareth Hanscom. Have you had a call?
No, my phone's on mine, but
I mean, the thing is, I don't care who you are, you can't really cope with 3 or 4 first choice in any position going down, can you? No,
it is tough, and like you say, in particular at outside half, where you got the experience of Dan Biggar and Rhys Patchell, who played so well in the World Cup, and obviously Gareth Hanscom didn't quite make the World Cup. They have sort of 3 top fly halves, and they all look to be out injured, certainly for this weekend. So yeah, it is tough, but I suppose there's an opportunity there if Dan Biggar isn't fit for the likes of Jared Evans, perhaps.
Josh Adams, another injury, out for the rest of the tournament with an ankle injury. How big a blow is that, and who do you think is likely to come in for him?
It's a huge blow. Again, talking about the World Cup, he's Wales' best player and started the Six Nations, in that sort of rich try-scoring form. And we're going to miss him. But I think it's a perfect opportunity for Louis Rees-Zammit, who's been playing so well for Gloucester. I think it's time to sort of put him in there. He's proven week in, week out for Gloucester that he can do a job, and I'd love to see him, and I know a lot of Welsh fans would like to see it as well.
Hooky, it's George Chuter here, mate.
Hey, George, right, mate?
Yeah, good, mate, good. Listen, without wishing to jinx it all, the Welsh haven't lost 3 games in a row, 3 successive losses since 2007, and it didn't happen at all under Warren Gatland. So I suppose the question is, Wayne Pivac, how much leeway does he get? How much time does he get? Obviously, following on from Warren Gatland, very, very tough job. How many losses can they take, for example?
Yeah, well, he's got to have a bit of time. He's a new coach and he's a quality coach. That's the reason he's got the job. And it was always going to be big boots to fill. Filling from Warren Gatland and Sean Edwards. Without forgetting him. He's a big loss for Wales. But yeah, he needs time, and he's got the players there. He's trying to play a sort of different, more expansive style of play. So yeah, it's frustrating because we had a great start against Italy. Everybody was getting really excited, and against Ireland, we had our chances. It was fine margins. Again, against France, we had our chances to win the game. So we're not a million miles away, but those wins have turned into losses, and it's not going to be an easy test going to Twickenham now on Saturday either.
Alan Wynne-Jones, 147th cap. Only McCaw's got more, 148. I mean, you know him well.
Yeah.
How long can he go on?
I don't know. He just does, and there's not enough sort of superlatives for him. He's an incredible athlete. Like you say, how he keeps going and keeps motivated week in, week out. And we just sort of see what goes on the weekend on the pitch, but he's exactly like that. On a Monday morning, whether you win or lose, he's got that motivation, and he's great for Wales and has been for many, many years. So long may it continue.
If they are going to win at Twickenham, what do they have to do?
I think we have to take our opportunities. There aren't going to be many opportunities there, and we've been there a couple of times as underdogs and won. We look back, it's a long time ago now, 2008. Nobody gave Wales a hope. We had a terrible first half and then turned it round somehow. So I think Wales are clearly going there as underdogs, and we got the talent there. I go back to the last couple of games Wales have played against Ireland and France. We've created opportunities, so I think we just got to take every single one of them if we're going to win. I got to be honest.
Yeah. And on a personal level, you're entering. Well, you're in the final season of your career. You've got I don't know how many more games left in the Ospreys jersey. How are you feeling about the future and about retirement? And what have you got lined up?
Yeah, no, I think I'm ready for it to come to the end of my contract with the Ospreys. I'm 35 in June, so I can't go on forever. I've enjoyed my career, but yeah, I'm enjoying doing a bit of coaching with the young boys in the Ospreys and the academy and things. So I want to carry on and stay involved with the game. It's pretty much all I've known for the last 16 years. So it'd be a shame to sort of leave that behind. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited about it and just feel ready. And it's time to finish now.
Well, James, I'm sure we'll speak to you before the end of the season. Well, let's hope so. If we don't, for some aberrant reason, best of luck in everything. You've had a fantastic career. You've left a great legacy.
Thanks very much, boys, and great to speak to you as always.
Cheers, mate.
Take care, mate.
Hello. Sorry to interrupt your podcast. I just wanted to take a quick moment to tell you about another programme from the Telegraph. I'm Ben Riley-Smith, the Daily Telegraph's US editor, and I've spent the last year exploring the scandal over links between Donald Trump and Russia for my new podcast, Crossfire. What I found was an extraordinary untold story that kept coming back to Britain.
The big gorilla in the room was, would Trump want to meet Putin? Would Putin then meet Trump?
And he said, and in any case, the Russians might use some material that they have on Clinton.
This is dangerous. This is really dangerous.
I've been tracking down those directly involved, from Washington to Cambridge to Belgravia, to try and find out what really happened and what it can tell us about this year's election.
So we're looking at the backdrop of Russia. We're looking at what they might be trying to do to our election.
Over 6 episodes, I will unpack it all, chunk by chunk, through the voices of those with direct knowledge.
Most people didn't even want to talk to me. I'm a guy getting death threats. I'm a guy whose life has been totally turned upside down.
I will tell you this, whoever it was, I hope they get punished for it.
That's in Crossfire, available now wherever you downloaded this podcast.
Well, Ireland's clash with Italy this weekend has been called off due to concerns over the coronavirus. Let's speak to Liam Toland, the Irish Times, about this. He's joining us now. Hello, Liam.
How are you, Brian?
Yeah, I'm not bad, mate. I don't suppose there's a lot you can do when a government minister says it's off, but what's the reaction of the Rugby Public and the IRFU been to all this?
Well, I suppose the public in general is pretty well informed and kind of reacting to the leadership both of the IRFU and the government. There was a little bit of a breakdown in communications, possibly between the IRFU directly and the government itself, when the Minister for Health suggested that the fixture against Italy should be at least rethought out and maybe cancelled. So that brought a little bit of indecision. We didn't know for sure what was going on, but I think we weren't expecting any more positive than that in a sense. And then the IRFU clarified it within 24 hours. So we kind of are where we are. And unfortunately, the coronavirus doesn't just impact the Six Nations. And like, we needed to get back up on the horse, didn't we, after the England performance in Twickenham. So from that point of view, the timing is terrible. But also into our domestic game in the Guinness Pro, it has an impact on how the table is functioning, and particularly with Connacht, they've got a couple of games in rounds 14 and 15 coming up in Italy. So it has an impact in our domestic game, but it also has a very strong domestic impact in our senior squad. And 35 of the Irish team or the Irish squad are currently training at the moment. So we're not 100% sure will the French game go ahead.
Well, that's an interesting thing, because if that doesn't go ahead, these fixtures are backing up. Presumably, they'll play them at some point, but given the nature of the season and how full it is, any idea when that might be?
I don't actually, but I suppose the first thing is it doesn't impact our international game. It has a knock-on effect to Europe and to our own domestic game. So it's not like just one competition's been impacted. It's like there's definitely going to be three competitions. So I don't have the crystal ball in front of me, Brian, I'm afraid, and I'm not 100% sure when these will be. Certainly the French game, I would be very surprised if it goes ahead. That's my only personal opinion. I have my flights and hotel booked, so I'd be disappointed. And of course, there's the other underlying issue of the Italians, for example. Lots of them will probably still travel to Dublin anyway, so it's a kind of, they won't be amalgamating in the stadium, but they'll be amalgamating in the bars and hosteleries around Dublin. So it's a kind of a funny one, isn't it? But certainly I don't have an answer to that, the bigger question: when are these fixtures going to be replayed, or will it just be given your classic 0-0 draw and 2 points each, which would be devastating for all concerned.
Liam, George Chuter here, mate. How are you?
Good, George.
Just interesting. You mentioned the Italians are still coming over. What would the financial damage to the IRFU be, do you reckon, as a result of a cancelled fixture?
Multiple millions, anyway, is the short answer. And I'm sure the devil is in the detail, where insurance and all that kicks in. I'm not privy to that type of detail myself, but I assume, like any sports fixture, when there's a cancellation, be it weather or God impact or whatever the case may be, there are some form of insurance. I don't know the answer to that, but each fixture is worth multiple millions to Dublin, and certainly worth an awful lot to the IRFU as well. We've seen the shot across the bow of pay-per-view wall coming into the Six Nations. So I suppose it's a timely reminder how fickle professional rugby can be, and how vulnerable we are to these little setbacks.
I mean, the French game were to go ahead and France were to win, the Italy game would have nothing at all riding on it. Would you see either team wanting to play it with the supporters or what?
Well, see, we're in a funny place, Brian. I think England proved a couple of weeks ago how much further down the track they are. We're still in very much the rebuilding from Rugby World Cup 19. And personally, on a selfish note, there's an awful lot of players, real quality young players, that may not have petered name-wise into your view at this stage, but I'd be very excited. That's why Italy is such an important fixture for us, because I think it will give Andy Farrell an opportunity to maybe to rest, or whatever the euphemism is, but maybe not pick certain players and allow others. We had, I don't know, did you see Leinster play last Friday night? There was a guy called Ryan Bard. He's 20 years of age, yeah. Second fixture in the second row for Leinster, and he scored 3 tries. He was absolutely phenomenal. So you'd love the Italian game to come along to allow, whether it's before France or afterwards, ideally before, obviously it's not going to happen. The reason for that is to kind of just flush out the negativity of Twickenham. That's not going to happen, but it would be a terrible loss to these younger guys. Will Connors as an open side. There's a lot of really, really good talented players coming through that the Italian game will give them a chance. Without it, then you're into the summer tour, and that's big time stuff as well. So the Italian game becomes very, very important for a multitude of reasons, not necessarily looking back in the history of the Six Nations Championship, but had we beaten Italy, us Ireland winning the championship was still alive. So that's another thing that's been lost by all of this.
When I spoke to Shane Byrne about this last week, he was very firmly of the opinion that changes should be made, for some of the youngsters, but that they should not be announced or masked by saying rest, rotation. It should be no, you're in, because that would send a signal to the underperforming experienced players. What's your view on that?
I think any time there's a selection, like if you were one of these young guys, and I can't remember, do you recall when you got your first nod? But when you get your first run out, whatever level you're playing at, ideally you want, if you're in the back row, for example, you want a couple of seasoned other back rowers with you. If in the front row, you want like your good scrummaging loosehead and tighthead if you're starting at hooker. And there are a lot of that potential there where, for example, there's a very, very exciting hooker, Kelleher, who's a relatively young guy coming out of Leinster. He would be ideally suited to play against Italy and to springboard then on into playing against France. But in order for him to perform at his best, you want the best around him as well. So I think Shane is right in not over-diluting the side, and certainly giving people, and it's really down to how Andy Farrell sells the selection. But it's hugely important that when a guy gets the cap or his first breakthrough, that he's not doing so as an also-ran for a lesser fixture, that he's earned it. And if you look at a lot of these Leinster players, and some in Munster and Ulster and Connacht, who will get the opportunity, in most cases they've earned it. So it's about selling that concept and not over-diluting the starting 15.
Well, Liam, let's just hope it's only one game, because I'm supposed to be going to Paris as well, and I would like to go and see that game. Mate, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today.
No problem, Brian. Take care. Bye-bye.
Anything ever happened like this with you? I think the foot and mouth was 2001. Might have been yours, was it?
Yeah, I was just trying to think off air, actually. In fact, on the way in, I was trying to think back, and I can remember only one game of mine being cancelled on the day, and that was the night Princess Diana died. So we were, I was at Saracens at the time, was it 97? We were due to play Richmond at Watford at Vicarage Road on the Sunday. Woke up in the morning, the radios were all playing this sort of sorrowful music, and it turned out this had happened, and we all went to the ground, and it was called off by about midday. I don't think there were any fixtures played that day actually in football either. So in terms of anything like this, nothing. Had a game cancelled a couple of years ago for the weather up in Chester for the club I coach in Hinckley. But no, I think that's the only two games I've ever been involved in that have been cancelled as far as I can remember.
I mean, I was going to ask you about the effect on the players, but it goes wider than that, doesn't it? It's all the preparation, because people have been planning
absolutely
just throughout the Six Nations, but also with an eye on doing things later. The way that they plan now is not just in this instant tournament, but it's trying to have some seamless things, even though there's a gap towards the end of the season. So, it quite major, really.
Oh, absolutely huge one. I mean, Liam's sort of hinted at it there with the millions of in Dublin that are going to be lost. I mean, you've got to think about all the hospitality that goes on there, the before match, during match, after match stuff. People have been booked, ex-players have been booked for speaking gigs, and people come in from all over Europe, potentially all over the world for these big European Six Nations games. So yeah, it's a massive deal, particularly if that French game gets cancelled as well. I mean, the ramification. I don't know when you can play two internationals in the rest of the season. I don't know how that affects players' contracts and international windows and all this sort of business. So it's. I mean, thankfully, this is a very unique situation, and we have to be very, very conscious that this is more than rugby. This is about people's lives, and this is a far more serious thing than blokes running around on the field. But financially and in terms of the logistical kickback on this is a huge event.
And the other thing, France are on the roll at the moment. They've got momentum. They'll be feeling really good. Who knows which players will be fit later in the season, where they'll all be. They could start one of the games like England, have a really bad half, and that be enough to lose them a game. So that that's not ideal either. As you say, there's not a lot you can do when it's a public health issue, is there? I suppose you have to respect that. It just seemed crazy that they're going to let a lot of Irish bars include Italians, if that's the reason for not having the game in the first place.
Well, the theory is actually alcohol kills the coronavirus, doesn't it? So actually in Dublin there'll be 0 cases this weekend.
Well, that'll be the same in the ground, for God's sake. Why don't we move on to a game that's definitely going to be on, the Scotland game against France. Now, Scotland recorded their first win over the Italians. And, of course, France are the form team at the moment. We're going to now get the thoughts of Dave Denton, the former Scotland back rower, who's on the line. Hello, Dave.
Hey, how you doing, guys?
Not bad, mate. A win over France would be a major scalp. But what would another home defeat mean, Dave?
Yeah, I think that's a big thing. Is that Scotland over the last couple of years, or particularly in Gregor's reign, there's been a lot of pride around the home record. We've been playing really well at home, and I do think they'll be going into this game with their tails up a little bit. I think no one's deluding themselves. We got a good win on the weekend, but particularly in attack, we would like to have done better, I expect. I've spoken to a few of the guys, and you can take a lot of positives from the fact that we nilled them away in Italy. That can often be a banana skin for us, as we always know that Italy are going to target our game. And the defensive effort was very good, so it's good to get the win. But to beat the French team, we're going to have to be a hell of a lot better. They've been playing some unbelievable rugby. And yeah, first and foremost, I mean, I would say this, but I think that the battle is going to be one up front, because they're a big bruising team. There's no doubt they've got a lot of subtlety about them at the moment, but they don't get that if they're not on the front foot. And that's an issue Scotland have struggled with over the last couple of years. When teams stop us going forward, it makes a big difference to how our backs can attack.
Hi, David. So George Chuter here, mate.
Hey, mate. How you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks, good. I mean, Wales changed the head coach, Wayne Pivac. The French brought in a new coaching system. England stays up. Ireland have got Andy Farrell. Do you think the Scots missed a trick by actually sticking with Gregor Townsend? Is he going to be around the next 4 years? Is there anyone else? Is there anyone else on the radar, do you think?
No, I think it would have been a mistake to change just after that World Cup. Obviously, the World Cup was disappointing for us, but I think it's too small a sample size. I think there has been a lot of progression in the team. I think there are areas of the game I think we can improve in. And I think you can see he started making changes within his own coaching team, and I think that indicates that there might be an element of him realizing, right, we need to do things a little bit differently. We need to, fair enough, we're going to play the fastest rugby in the world, or that's our ambition. We're going to have these electric backs. We've got potentially 2 of the best players in the world when they're playing in our back line. But now we need to get them going forward. And I think all the stuff I'm hearing about the defence coach is fantastic. I think he gives the players a lot more ability to sort of lead their own defence and how they want to tackle, and not prescripting exactly how you have to defend every situation, which is nice to see, particularly in modern rugby, where a lot of it, I mean, you can get up to 4 phases prescribed at the moment, which can become a little bit ridiculous. But it's, I think they need to stick with him for now. They need stability, and he is a great coach. But if things don't start turning around, then maybe they start asking those questions. I don't know.
David, the entire campaign has obviously been clouded by the Finn Russell controversy. He said he won't be back for the last 2 games, but likely to return for the summer. He said that he's had positive talks with Gregor Townsend. Now, you know both these men well. What the hell does that mean?
I don't really know, to be honest. I think I've had a lot of conversations with a few people. I haven't spoken to Finn directly, and I don't know exactly what's going on at the moment. But look, I think what seemed to have happened is Finn took exception to this rule, and he thought it was ridiculous. He's a grown man. He should be able to have a third beer if he wants a third beer. Which I can see both sides of the argument. I can see where Finn's coming from. But then from Gregor's point of view, if there's a rule there, it's a rule. And that's how it works. And then, unfortunately, what happened was when it went public, I mean, you just hate to see it. I think this could have been handled behind closed doors. And I think Finn went public, and I think came across quite well in the newspaper in terms of It's not about drinking. It's not about going out and going wild. It's about respect, and it's about trust and all these things. And then they had to come back at him. And then it just seems, if you're arguing in the press, he was never going to come back during the Six Nations at that point, was he? Once they started taking the public blows at each other, I didn't think that was ever going to happen. But no, it seems that they've, well, according to the press, and I haven't spoken to any of the boys since that came out yesterday or the day before, but it's, look, that's great news for Scottish rugby if they're finding a way past this, because the reality is that Finn is our most important player. There's an argument, maybe Hoggy might be our best player or whatever it is. And Adam Hastings, fair play to him, has done really well. I actually heard one of the boys told me last week that apparently in the game against Italy, Adam beat the most defenders of anybody under Gregor Townsend's spell as the Scotland coach. So he is doing really well, but there's no question that Finn is one of the best 10s in the world, and we don't have enough players for people to be sitting out and not playing a tournament when they're fit to play.
And there's some reports that Russell might actually drop into the coaches' meeting ahead of the game this weekend to share his viewpoint. Obviously, playing for Racing 92, he'll know a number of the French players very, very well. In fact, do you think this is a good idea? Is this a sort of a way to slightly open the door, and or would you see it descending into a brawl in the coaches' office?
I think you're right. I think it's a little bit of an olive branch on both sides. I think. How much they use of the insight in the chat, I don't know, but I think it's a good starting point for them to show that they respect Finn as a player and as a leader, and for Finn to show that he's still willing to help, and he still wants to be involved. There's no question he still wants to play for Scotland. He still wants to play in the biggest tournament in the world after the World Cup in the Six Nations, and he's not going to do that this year, but I think it's important for him to get back involved on both sides, to sort of, like I said, just to sort of mend those bridges a little bit.
Yeah. Just finally, David, what are they going to have to do to beat France?
I think, like I said, I'm biased in this sense, but against any French team, and France haven't been amazing for the last few years, and it's fantastic to see them playing at this level again, because everyone loves to watch France when they're playing well. But any French team, their game plan is built up front. They are big, bruising men. And if you don't stop them going forward, that's when you get these guys, the Intermax and people like that are going to rip the game apart. Their 9-10 combination is so strong. And it can make, if they're on the back foot, it's a lot harder for them to make a difference. If they're going forward and they've got these big 100 and whatever kg forwards steamrolling over the top of us, then they're going to be a force that's going to need to be reckoned with, and it's going to be tough. But fair play, Greg has picked up, over the last few weeks, he's picked a smaller pack than you'd sometimes expect, and they've fronted up physically, and you love to see it. And I think if we are going to win, we need to beat them up physically. I don't want to throw out cliches, but that is the way it works with the French team. If they beat you up, you're in a lot of trouble.
I firmly agree with that. Whether Scotland can do it remains to be seen, but it's great to speak to you, and thanks very much, David.
No problem. Thanks for having me,
Cheers,
guys.
Dad. Can you see Scotland doing France? Look, if the weather levels the game, possibly, all things being equal, at the moment, the 10 points, 10 points inferior to me.
I think the French are just far too good at the moment. I actually didn't pick them winning in Cardiff. I thought that. Before the tournament started, I said England would lose in Paris, but England would win the Six Nations. There would be no Grand Slam. I just couldn't believe that the French could actually travel to Cardiff and win. I think it's just a bridge too far for the Scottish. They haven't quite got enough firepower up front. The scrums well, they haven't quite got enough firepower up front to take them on. And really, sort of outside of Stuart Hogg, I'm not seeing much of a cutting edge in the backs either, to be honest.
Time now for your questions. We'll leave the Six Nations ones till the end. This is tangential to that from Neil Taylor. Do the French sell their own TV rights? If so, could they have a say in the tournament broadcast rights? Also, could they sell their home game rights to anyone? Well, yes, they do have a separate deal, but there is a law in France similar to the Crown Jewels, but it's not on their Category B list, and it has to be free to air. So whatever they do, it will be free to air. And no, I don't think they'll have much of an influence in where the Six Nations contract goes, but we'll go on to talk about that a bit later. A question from Dave. One for you, George. How easy is it to jump from club to England, and why do some players seem to find it easier to get a chance? And he lists, gives an example, Furbank versus Dombrant.
Yeah, it actually is very, very difficult. Again, back in my day, we used to flip between the England camp and the club. On the fallow weekends, we used to come back and play league games or sit on the bench or whatever would be involved. So we weren't away for that extended period, weren't in camp for that extended period. Nowadays, there's only a few players here and there who perhaps aren't getting enough game time actually get back and go and play for their clubs. But it is very difficult. You've got to adjust back to, I mean, obviously you know your calls from your club, you know your patterns of play from the club, because you've been there for the whole season, but actually flitting between the two within sort of 4 or 5 days is very tricky, mentally more than physically. It's a big challenge. You depending on how much training you've done, how much you've played for England, of course, you're probably not too fatigued to go and play back for your club. But mentally, it's a big lurch, and it's not. That's probably why they now have them in camp for the whole period, particularly the first choice, the first team, first sort of 20, 22 players. They don't actually have to worry about switching into club mode for that whole period, which is probably beneficial, very beneficial to England, I'll say.
A question from Matt Raven. Do the salary cap rules and the emergency signing systems need tightening or altering somehow so teams can't lose players mid-season to make the cap? Seems that this is skewing the league this year. Well, Matt, if you get your sums right, you shouldn't need to, should you, frankly? Yeah. What do you reckon about, Chris Ashton, with immediate effect going from Sale? Where's he going?
I have no idea. I've heard Quins, I've heard various places. But again, the question is who has money under the cap to sign Chris Ashton, who he's not cheap, I wouldn't have thought. In terms of your regulations, you're totally correct. You know before the season starts what your wage bill should be. Your payroll should be, so you shouldn't really need to be jettisoning players mid sort of season. It does affect everything, but the pure fact that you're over the salary cap anyway, it skews the league unfairly. So I think it's a bit of an odd question. But yeah,
it's a bit of an odd situation, isn't it? Totally out of the blue and without explanation, just off with immediate effect.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll probably never know the full ins and outs of that. There must be legal ramifications around it. Both sides talking about it. I guess we can speculate. Maybe there's a falling out between Steve Diamond and Chris Ashton. Wouldn't be the first person that Steve Diamond's
never.
Yeah. So there could be some of that. It could just be a case of Ashton's not getting enough rugby, and had a sit down with the coach and said, "Look, can you let me go? I want to play some rugby somewhere." We don't know, but yeah, if it's salary cap orientated, then yeah, that's someone's obviously got the wrong side of the calculator in pre-season.
Billy Byers, the bottom end of the Prem table might need a bit of spice, but it's alive and kicking at the top. Is this the closest top four in years? Let me just make a point about the bottom. Everyone said that these games would be terrible because Sarri's definitely going down, no one else is. I haven't detected that, have you?
Yeah, well, there's not been a lack of intensity. Saracens went up to Saints at the weekend, and that looked like saw the highlights. It looked like a fantastic game. There have been a few. Worcester Leicester at the weekend was fairly dour. So some of the teams at the bottom are slogging, and they're at the bottom for the reason that they're just not as good as everyone else at the moment. The top four, I would have said it was the closest top four for a long time, but then Gloucester lost at home, and Northampton lost at home. So yeah, Exeter look like the best team in the league. They're not 100%. They've creaked and lost their games as well. It's certainly, I think the Premiership now that Saracens are relegated just definitely relegated. They're still the two best teams are Exeter and Saracens, and the rest, that's probably 8 or 9 teams, are all at a very similar level where they can win at home, they can probably beat most other teams, but they're no one's sort of climbing out of the soup just yet.
And finally, we get on to the subject. Question from Seamus. Which brain box thinks it's a good idea to put these Six Nations behind a paywall? What's your view on this?
I'm firmly behind this being free to view it. I didn't grow up watching rugby. I was relatively late to the game. I started playing it when I was 12 years old. Back then we had rugby special with Chris Rea or Nigel Stalmer-Smith back then on a Sunday. So an hour of highlights, and then the Five Nations came around. So you had five or six of those. That's what I grew up watching. I grew up watching yourself, Mauro, and Assault for 2 weeks after Murrayfield in 1990. I remember watching Dino in England colours. That's what inspired me, and he's still my hero. And that I know it's obviously a different time. There was no real sort of cable TV and Sky TV back then, but I think it'd be an absolute travesty if it becomes a block behind a paywall. It should be. It's as much of a national institution as Wimbledon. Every year, rugby fans congregate to either go to the games or watch them in pubs or watch them at home, and they should do so in the way it has always been. The only way we can make it better is we brought back Bill McLaren and wanting for the old days. But I really I understand it. Sky and all these other companies, BT Sport, they wanted to be in charge of it all, and you've got to pay to view those things. But I'd be really, really unhappy if it was lost from free to view.
Let me make this plain. I think that both BT and Sky cover rugby really well. I don't have a problem with that. People can sell their rights, but this is the point for me. Rugby is not the national sport. It is not ubiquitous like football, and as such, it needs exposure as well as cash. It does need both. And at the moment, you've got a compromise where the autumn internationals are on satellite TV with Sky, which brings a lot of money, and the free-to-air Six Nations brings in huge viewership. When you're getting 9.2 million, for an England-France game, as against 1.5 million for an England-New Zealand game on satellite TV, and that is arguably the biggest draw you could ever get, then you can see that is the difference. And by definition, there are many millions are casual watchers who might take up the sport, who just dip in, who don't really watch any other rugby sometimes. And we know that because if that wasn't true, rugby would be the national sport, and it's not, and we know that. You look at cricket's example, when they went off free-to-air in 2005, they announced a decade later record turnover, record profits, record investment in the game, and a near 30% drop in numbers. Rugby cannot afford to get this decision wrong because the consequences will be long-term. And to pick those up, even if it was reversed after, say, a 3-year, the damage is done for whole things. I just say this as well. CVC, Capital Partners, they are an equity investment firm. They've no track record in rugby. The track record they've got in sport with Formula One shows that they take a lot of money out. Yes, they do add value in the sense of ratcheting things, but you've got to remember their global TV audience for F1 went down over a 10-year period when they were in charge because it went behind a paywall. And for me, the other point is this. They have got, potentially, if they do the £300 million deal, 14% share in the Six Nations, which is the same as everyone else, same as Italy and no one else. So they're not a majority stakeholder. They've got 20% of the Premiership, again, minority shareholder, only 2% over where they get minority shareholder protection under law. I don't know what their 120 million bought them from the Pro 14, but the point is this, they do not own any tournament. So why is rugby treating them as if they do own tournaments? Because they don't. If you wanted to, you could leave them in a liquid market where they could have no say at all. And frankly, if they don't get in line, that's what they ought to say to them. I can't understand why Brett Gosper of World Rugby is saying, well, they're obviously a big player, therefore we've got to talk to them. When they start to own tournaments, when they put enough money in to actually own tournaments, then you can. When you own things, you can call the shots, but not beforehand. Not beforehand, tail wagging dog and all these terrible cliches. And just remember this. They have no interest in this beyond money. And of course they wouldn't, because that's what they do. And there's nothing wrong with that. But let's understand that. That's what they do. They won't have to pick the pieces up if this goes wrong. They won't have to deal with the long-term effects on the game. And frankly, they don't care, because that's not their raison d'etre. This isn't a sentimental thing. It's not about my or anyone else's job. I earn more money from private, media interests. It's simply this. I do believe rugby has to have both the cash and the exposure. And at the moment, it's got both. I don't see any reason why that couldn't continue. Whether you swap them around, I don't know. But it seems crazy to me to take this chance, because the detrimental effects of this could be absolutely major on Northern Hemisphere rugby and could be long-lasting. Why do that? If you're talking about an absolutely extraordinary sum, then it might be worth taking the chance. I still don't think it would be, because I'm absolutely convinced you need the exposure, because you need to inspire kids. They need to see it on TV. But when we're not talking about that, and we're not, because they haven't put enough money in to even buy a majority share, then why even take that chance?
That's got a quite staggering difference in viewing numbers. I knew it was lower on Sky than it was on terrestrial. I didn't realise it was that much lower. That's incredible.
The BBC highlights programme of the England-Australia Autumn International got more than the live broadcast.
That's amazing, isn't it?
And that's with Sky, and BT doing it well. There's nothing wrong with their product. It's very good. It's just the absolute difference between free-to-air and satellite TV. Well, that's all we have time for this week on Brian Moore's Full Contact with the Telegraph. Thank you to my co-host George Chuter, and to all our guests. I'll be back every Monday evening during the Six Nations, whenever that may be. Could extend to the end of the season, let's hope so. You can get the podcast from all the usual places you get your podcasts from. So if you've enjoyed this episode or any of our previous episodes, please do subscribe. Enjoy the weekend's matches, the ones that go ahead. That's all. And we'll be with you next week.